Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back, and watching. I appreciate it. Hope your day's going well. And if you are new here, my name's Jim. Great to meet you. Thanks for stopping by. I make videos about editing your photos using various tools, and I'm here to try to remove some of the confusion and complexity that you may experience with these editing tools. I want to make it easy and fun. And if you're not having fun, you're probably doing it wrong. So let's have fun. And today's photo is a waterfall photo, and I'm using Luminar 4. And in this photo, what I'm going to do is show you 5 different ways, 5 tips or tricks, if you will, to take a waterfall photo and make it really stunning. So these are 5 different ideas you can implement in your own photos of waterfalls to really make them just dramatic and just really sort of pop off the screen. So here's the photo. I shot this in Wales. It's already a fairly dramatic scene. You got 2 waterfalls, the water's kind of going that way and coming back around. You got rocks coming in from both sides, fairly dramatic. And by the way, I shot this with a 10 stop filter, so it's a longer exposure, about 15 seconds, I believe. It's also a fairly busy composition. I think it's beautiful. I'm a little bit biased because I shot it, but I wanted to turn it into something that was a little cleaner and a little more dramatic. Of course, I do like to go with a little bit of drama in my photos. I find that interesting, but I also wanted to make it beautiful and really make the water and just the whole scene really pop and come to life, almost like it's just like something that you would see in a movie. So I turned it into that. Now, this was a number of different tips and tricks, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset these filters, and we're going to walk through it, and we're going to start right now. Okay, so we are in the Light tool on the Essentials tab. All of this work that I did in this photo was done on a single layer. I love layers. They're very powerful. They give you a lot of creative control and flexibility, but I don't always need them. This time I didn't need it other than an erased image layer, which is sort of automatic when you use the eraser tool. But that's my base photo, and there it is after light. So let me show you what I did here. I made a slight temperature and tint adjustment. As you saw in the final photo, there's a little bit of a blue tint to the photo. I'll show you how I did that. I did something that I don't normally do. That's kind of like one of the tips, if you will. But I used smart contrast here, brought down shadows and highlights, both. I'm creating a little bit of drama. The highlights, because it's a long exposure, even with the 10 stop, it was fairly kind of glaring. So I was trying to control that a little bit by bringing down the highlights. But you can see I did actually bump up the whites. I want it to pop. I just don't want it to be blown out. And so brought down the shadows and brought down the blacks. All I'm trying to do by controlling the light is I want that center strip, which is the water, to be fairly bright and vibrant. And except for a few exceptions, I want the rocks to be a little bit darker. So you have the dark and the light, which is really what photography is all about, managing that light and creating contrast, because contrast is the difference between the dark parts and the bright parts. I want to have good contrast in the photo, and I do think I achieved that in the final result. So that was the light tool, which took me from there to there. And so the next thing I did, and this is tip number 1, and that is I went to AI structure, but I did something a little bit different. Normally I'll take AI structure and either drag it to the left to soften details or drag it to the right to increase details. In this case, I dragged it to the right to create some of that kind of punch. However, I then applied it with a luminosity mask. So all you do is you make your adjustment. I went to 37 and then I clicked on luminosity. It automatically builds a luminosity mask. I'm going to show you that mask by clicking on brush and getting over here. Now, what you'll notice is I actually inverted the mask. So the mask started out like that. And that's exactly what I do not want. That is, the structure, which is increased or positive, which means it crunches up the details. It's mostly applied to the water and less to the rock. So I wanted the opposite. I want the water to stay soft and smooth. I want the rock to get a little bit crunchier. So I added the luminosity mask, and then I came over here and hit invert. And as you can see, that's almost perfect because the water is so white, and because it's a luminosity mask and I've inverted it, it's really hitting the dark parts, which is all the rock. That's tip number 1, is in scenes like this where you have a large contrast between dark and light, you can use a luminosity mask and invert it to hit those darker parts, and it works like a champ. Okay, next step was to go to Details Enhancer, and this was pretty straightforward. I took the small and medium details, moved them to the right a little bit, and then I took a brush and I just painted them in. Now you can see I didn't paint them in everywhere. If I close this, I just painted here on these areas and some of these rocks here and here. All I'm trying to do is punch up the detail in some of the stuff that's really prominent, A, and B, kind of more in the foreground. I didn't get into the stuff over here on the right. I'm kind of keeping it close to the stuff that's kind of close to the water. I feel like standing that out with a little bit of detail punch is going to be just fine. And to my eye, it looks great this way. I didn't really want to get into detail up here or over here in the corner, that sort of thing. It's kind of immaterial to me. And by the way, I had previously just used AI structure on those rocks, so I felt like they had enough. So I just went specific with Details Enhancer using the brush. Okay, now we're going to jump over here to the Creative tab. And the first thing I do here is in the Glow filter or tool. And this is tip number 2 for really pumping up those waterfall photos. And that is, I went in with Glow and I chose Soft Focus Bright. What that does is it really pops the whites and the brighter parts, and it gives it a soft focus, which makes it kind of smooth. Well, that's applying to the bright parts. The bright parts is the water, right? So the thing I did though is I went in with a gradient mask and I dropped that in and just mostly applied it to the bottom half of the photo. Let me click on brush and show you. Here we go. I'll come over here. Let me click on that. You can see I took it about the center of the photo and dropped it down. So all of my soft focus bright adjustment here is just hitting the bottom of the photo. And because it just applies to the bright parts, I don't need to worry about it messing up the rocks or anything like that. All I'm really doing is popping and increasing the brightness of the water in the bottom of the frame. 2 reasons. Number 1, it's closer to you. So I feel like visually and in real life, it's going to seem a little bit brighter because it's closer. And secondly, the stuff in the background, especially the big waterfalls here coming over the rocks, they're bright enough. I don't feel like I need to do anything else. So let me turn this off. You can see the white part in the water here, or I should say the water, it is the white part, in the foreground is a little bit darker. And now when I turn this on, you can see it's a bit brighter. So that's tip number 2. Use the soft focus bright on the glow filter. And if you're doing a waterfall, consider just using a gradient mask on the section that's in the foreground because it really helps to pop. And I think now it's more fluid. Terrible pun. I didn't even mean it as a pun because it is moving water, but it's more fluid in terms of how the white kind of flows and follows through because I think it's brighter in the foreground. Okay, and by the way, I'm jumping from tab to tab. I did this kind of in this order in my editing, so I'm showing you how I bounce around. I don't do every filter on one tab and then go to the next tab. I do bounce around a little bit. So in that spirit, I'm going to go over here to the Portrait tab and get Orton. And this was a fairly straightforward. I hit it with 29 across the entire photo, and you can see the impact it's had. It basically creates a little bit more contrast. Again, difference between dark and light. So that's what contrast is. So that's another way to help me pop those whites. I want to manage them. I don't want them to get blown out or completely overblown or overdone, but I want it to be pretty white and bright because I'm creating that kind of almost a fantasy look in my waterfall where dark and moody kind of around it with the rock, but really bright and glowing in the center. So the Orton effect is helping me with that because it does brighten those white parts and darken the dark parts. One more time, there's before. Everything's a little bit brighter, especially around the rocks, and the white of the water is not quite as bright. And now after, there you go. It gets a little bit more contrast, so a little bit more pop, and I think that looks really good here. Okay, now I'm going back to the Creative tab, and this time I'm getting fog. And this is the first time I've ever done this, so this is tip number 3, and that is using fog to accentuate the water. So let me show you what I did there. I went in and I got light fog, and I went to about 40, and then I also added a luminosity mask. In this case, I do want it to apply to the white or the bright parts or the luminous parts. So the luminosity mask works great because it sticks the fog, light fog of 40 on the brighter parts of the image. The bright parts are the water, and that's where I want it. So it worked great. So let me show you. I have to click on brush to show you the mask, but I chose the luminosity mask, and as you can see, it applied perfectly in the stream, and then I did come in with the eraser, and that's the other part. This is like part 2 of this tip. Don't hesitate to come in with the eraser and just say, well, I don't really want a luminosity mask there or there, and you can just come in here and customize it. And that's exactly what I did. I just erased it from some of the rock on either side of the stream so that that fog doesn't apply there. And I'm customizing a little bit more, seasoned to taste, I guess is the best way of putting it. But the fog adds a nice little bit of oomph to that white, and using the luminosity mask allows me to almost exclusively get it right into the water. So there's before. You can see the water's a little bit tamer, and after, you can see it's got a little bit more pop, almost like it's got a little bit of mist coming off of it, which, hey, by the way, that would be kind of foggy, right? So I think it adds to the mood, and that's why that's tip number 3 is use the fog with a luminosity mask and erase it from the areas you don't want it, and it does give a nice little pop to that streak of white, which is the water. So fog fits perfectly in there, and I think accentuates the look. Okay, so that's 3 tips already. Let's get to the pro tab. Tip number 4 is to use dodge and burn, and there's no way to show you where I did it other than just to turn this tool on and off. But I went in and I start usually with a 12 or a 15 in terms of the amount, both brighten and darken. And mostly what I did here is darken, by the way, because I just came in and did a number of different things. Like some of this rock up here was too dark. It was a little too dark here. Some of the areas where it's kind of dark, I just made it darker. So let me turn this off. And if you look at some of those areas, you can see where it's brighter and then now darker. Also notice one more thing to look at here is this rock in the foreground. It's got a little bit of greenery on it. I wished it had more, but I will show you how to accentuate that in a second. But that it grabs my eye. It's like the anchoring element of the foreground. And so turning that off, if you look just at that rock, it was pretty dark, right? Even with a 15-second exposure, because the white is so bright, there's a big contrast there. So I used dodge and burn there to lighten that. And again, I started at like a 15, and I just go over it and go over it and go over it, etc., until I get it where I like it. So again, one more time, dodge and burn. There's before, a little bit darker in some of those, a little bit brighter in some of those rocky areas and some of those shadowed areas, a little brighter and a little bit dark in that anchoring element rock in the foreground. And then after dodge and burn, some of those darker areas or shadowed areas are now much darker and also much brighter in this anchoring element. And I wanted to bring that up because I want to point that out. I want your eye to see that and be drawn in by the rock and the color. So dodge and burn, very powerful tool. That's why that's tip number 4. Okay, and tip number 5 in terms of, this is where I used the photo filter, which I really don't use very much at all, to create a little bit of mood. I was kind of going for this fantasy, kind of dramatic look, and adding a little bit of blue just felt like it fit. And I would normally go into split toning. Here's the thing with split toning is you got to do highlights and shadows, and you got to sort of figure out, and I sound like I'm picking on the split toning tool, which I'm not. I absolutely love, like all caps, love split toning. I use it all the time. But for this photo, it worked better for me to use photo filter. I just put it in blue and I dragged them out to 11. It's just a touch. It's almost like a temperature change, which I could do with the light tool by moving the blue slider. But if you look at, there's the before, it's got a little bit more warmth. And then after, it's got a little bit more of that, like, I don't know, I consider it like a romantic mood. Romantic is maybe the wrong word, but kind of bluer, and not a whole lot, just very gentle. So that was photo filter, and that was tip number 5. And that allowed me to give a little bit of mood to the photo and just kind of get the look that I was going for. Okay, still 2 more things to do, so stay with me. I'm going to go back and we're going to wrap it up on the Essentials tab. The next thing I did is color. And what I did here is I wanted to pop the color in that rock in the foreground. And so you can see the primary colors sticking out there, which you can see now because of the dodge and burn that we did a moment ago. You can see there's some yellow and some green. So what I did is I went in here and I took the vibrance up to 45, and then I took the yellow sliders up for both saturation and luminance. So I want more of that color, and I want it to be brighter. Saturation, luminance, and then same with green. I took both of those up, around 30 or so. Saturation, the amount of color, and luminance, the brightness of the color. Plus the vibrance bump of 45, I think gives a nice pop to that rock. Now it's a little bit electric, but it's such a small amount, I actually think it looks okay. If it was a big patch of grass or moss, I think it would be overdone with that much. But because it's such a small little area, and by the way, I masked it in, I took the brush, and I just painted it in right there. So that's all I did. I made it specifically just there because it was also picking up some yellows and greens like on these rocks and over here in this little tree. And I didn't want that. I just wanted it right there. So again, one more time, there's before, a little darker and a little bit less saturated, and after, a little bit more electrified color and brighter as well. So that luminance value of the yellow and the green really complemented what I did with dodge and burn a few tools ago. So that was a nice little bonus thing to do. And the last thing was really just a vignette, and that's because I'm creating this mood. So let me turn it on, you'll see it. I'm just creating this mood where it's a little bit darker. It's an intimate scene, for lack of a better word. Now I was further away. I shot this at I think 62 Yeah, 62 millimeters, by the way, is 13 seconds at f9. I was saying 15 seconds. 13 seconds at f9 with a 10-stop filter. Middle of the day. I'm down in a little bit of a gully. There's a lake there. There's like a bridge behind me, and I just found this little scene and I loved it. But I wanted to do kind of an intimate shot, so I shot it at 62 millimeters, so kind of zoomed in. But the vignette, I think, really helps tighten that up a little bit. And I would even go a little bit more. I think you can get away with that with the size and the amount being fairly tight because it is an intimate scene and I want it to feel that way. And that's really the edit. The last thing I did is I went over here and I have an erased image layer. And if you look, I erased a lot of tiny, tiny little things that I think adds up to a cleaner composition because it removes a lot of distractions. So what I did is these rocks have all these little spots on them. I don't know what they are, right? Just like mineral spots or deposits. I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I don't know very much about rocks. I do know there were a lot of spots and they were distracting. So over here I took things out. There's a lot of things I took out. I took out some errant branches from this tree. Let me turn it off and you just pay attention to like the whole photo. You can see that there's just a lot of things. Like here's some white spots on the rock. Here's some spots. There's some spots over here. And when I got the eraser out and started removing them, I just think it cleans up and simplifies the composition. And that's all I was building. Dramatic, I think beautiful, kind of ethereal, kind of moody shot, but I wanted it to be more simplified and more intimate, and I think the eraser and the erased image layer helps me do that. So here it is. There's the before. We came a long way, my friends, really long way in this image. Busy, I think. I didn't change. There's no crop changes or anything like that, but still busier, and I think it's because it's fairly well evenly lit. There's not enough contrast. I think there's too much warmth, and I think there's too many little spots that need to be removed. And after, much more intimate and moody and kind of, almost like a fantasy novel kind of look. I don't know if that's the right description, but to me it's kind of a fantasy look, and I love it. And if you want to do the slider, you can see here, like especially right up here at the top, you can see I took out that big spot and just kind of another one there. Just kind of simplified some of the look of these rocks. And I did the same over here. Like if you look in this kind of right section over here, and as I drag that, you can see I pulled a lot of spots out of there. But that's my edit, my friends, and that's 5 tips, plus a bunch of other little ones I threw in, but 5 big things that I did to really make this image pop. You can use it on a lot of different waterfalls. I've done it on 3 or 4 now and been experimenting with these techniques. It's working really well for me. I hope that it works well for you. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for hanging out. I'll be back soon with more. I'm having fun. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Have a great day. I'll see you later, my friends. Take care and adios.